friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 7, lucky day 7 of our read along together of Roughing It. Sorry, let's do that a little rougher. Roughing It by Mark Twain. So let's go ahead and start with some tea because we are the Tea with Mark Twain group. Today's tea for me is a chai. This one is a chai, I think is, by Steep. Let's see. And it's been steeping for several minutes. And so it has a nice good color to it. And let's see. Ooh, nice and spicy. This one, it says the ingredients it has with it are the organic black tea with organic ginger, organic cinnamon, organic cardamom, organic cloves, and natural caramel flavor. It smells so good. If I'd been planning ahead more, I would have brought in some cream for that one. Ooh, that's really nice though. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about what we read yesterday. And by the way, I did finally finish mapping out our book. I am just enough of a librarian that I like mapping these things out in an semi-orderly fashion. So here's our schedule of what we're gonna read all the way through. Unless things change, unless we cannot, like happened before, if I cannot stop reading one day and I have to continue on a little longer, it's looking like we're going to finish on Thursday, April 22nd. So we are mapped out. It's going to be 22 days of reading. We are on day 7. So we are almost a third of the way through our book. So yesterday we read chapters 19 through 22. And let's see. Chapter 19. Yeah, again, one of those slightly, I know they're meant to be humorous. I'm reading way too much with the modern sensibility. I need to stop that, I think. But it's a little uncomfortable. He was talking a bit about, he was teasing about one of the Indian tribes that he was calling the Goshoots. And he was just saying how it was basically calling them rather pitiful. Let's see. Then he went into talking about... let's see. Oh yeah, he was still talking about the Indian tribe, and I hope I'm probably mispronouncing it, the Goshoots. But that's what I'm going to call them. I also did think this was kind of neat too. He mentioned the disgust which the Goshoots gave me, a disciple of Cooper and a worshiper of the Red Man, even of the scholarly savages of the Last of the Mohicans. So that was all. For anyone who hasn't yet read Last of the Mohicans, that's a reference to Daniel Fenimore Cooper, author of Last of the Mohicans. And so he was mentioning how he loved those stories. And he was surprised, based on his love of those stories and what he had read about the Native Americans in the area, that he was surprised or Native Americans, I guess on the East Coast would be where where Cooper's stories were set, that he was surprised by seeing this different tribe and how they behaved. Let's see. Let's move on. In the next chapter, he talked about when they arrived over finally in almost through the desert, or sorry, not through the desert, almost through the mountains there. Yeah, sorry. There was a comment that one of our other readers, Judy, was saying that it is a little difficult to read. And it is one of those things, when you read stories that are set in an earlier time, there are things that we wouldn't publish probably nowadays. But it's a difficult thing, because it's sort of like, it feels a little uncomfortable sometimes as a modern reader. You do want to kind of have, put it in context. But, I feel like we can enjoy the stories, but still be aware and cognizant of things that we perhaps are just recognize what we're not comfortable with now. But yeah, it's interesting too to think that while I think many readers were approaching Mark Twain's stories with the knowledge that he was a satiric writer. Obviously he had a buffalo climbing up a tree. They know that these things are not 100% true, but at the same time, for many people, this would be their first glimpse of the West, as seen by somebody who actually went there. And Mark Twain was somebody who was very trusted in American society, and so giving a picture from somebody they could trust on their perspective, even though knowing that he would be teasing along the way. So it makes it interesting as modern readers to go back and see it. Okay, so chapter 20 chapter 20 was actually a really hilarious chapter. It was started out with them saying how they were driving along, along on their coach or stagecoach on their 19th day. And as they're crossing the desert, and they hear the story about Horace Greeley crossing the desert. And it was so lumpy. The ride was so rough that the driver, Hank Monk, said, because Horace Greeley said, I have to get to this place and I need to get there fast. So Hank Monk set off really fast, and it was so bumpy basically that Horace Greeley, all the buttons on his coat were knocked off his jacket because it was just so bumpy of a ride. And finally, his head shot up through the roof of the stage, and he asked the driver to go slower. And he's like, "Oh no, you want it? I'll get you there on time. Don't you worry." And he get him there on time, and he bet he did what was left of him. I tell you the story in a bit of detail because shortly thereafter, he hears it again. And the first time when I read it, the second time, I was like, is this a typo? What's going on? Played it off, kept reading. By the third time, I was like, oh, this is supposed to be happening. And by then I too was clued in. Sometimes I'm a little slow. And it just goes on and on, where Mark Twain recounts it with different ways of so many different travelers, fellow travelers, as well as drivers and conductors, and everyone tells this same anecdote. And eventually it's so painful that he doesn't want to hear it again. And he says that there's this man who's ill, and he's like, I thank you for saving me when I was dying in the desert. To pay you back, let me tell you this story. And he starts to tell a story, and Mark Twain cuts him off, no, please save my sanity, don't tell the story again. And the man agrees to hold it in, but the strain of holding in this ubiquitous story kills the man, and he dies in their arms. So Mark Twain goes on again, and he says how he ends up hearing this story so many times. Let's see how many times he said it. He heard it at least 481 or 482 times. He's not sure. But he heard it many times on many journeys over the years. And what he finally concludes it with is that the most frustrating thing to him is not only that he heard the story so many times, but that the story wasn't very good. It wasn't very interesting. But on top of that, to make it even worse, it wasn't even true. He's like, if you're gonna make up a story, you're gonna tell the story over and over again, make it at least a good story. Make it better than his head popped through the carriage and the buttons came off his shirt, it's or off his coat. Come on, make it a better story than that. And my only response to that would be, clearly, they needed Mark Twain to come up with a better story. Something that we would keep telling today. I don't know, maybe something about a jumping frog at Calaveras County. So that was chapter 20, and that was a good one. Chapter 21, let's see. Oh, they reached Carson City, the capital of the Nevada Territory, where Mark Twain's brother was employed and was going to be working. And he talks about how where they get situated, there's a strong wind, so strong that everything around them is flying up around, is lifted into the air. I was picturing the scene at the beginning of The Wizard of Oz when, the tornado comes through their little town and lifts up the house and everything in it. And so, but yeah, he says how there's a whole bunch of folks there. They're staying in a boarding house. There's this group called the Irish Brigade, who are basically hangers-on and friends of the governor. And he tries to create some work for them by sending them to do some surveying for the railroad that he thinks will eventually come in. And the guys fall for it at first. They're like, well, let's go out and do a little surveying and come back at night. And then it's too far to come back at night. We'll just camp out for a few days and come back once a week. And then finally it's like, well, how far do you want us to survey this thing? It's all the way back to the Atlantic. At which point the guys clue in that they're being just gotten out of the way, and they come back and they stop surveying. So it's just a fun chapter where they're talking about the adventures they're having there, the tarantulas they find there. Finally, the last chapter we read was Mark Twain and a friend of his named Johnny, who go out and they decide that around Lake Tahoe, they've heard there's some beautiful territory, beautiful land out there. And that if they go out there, they can basically claim a homestead, claim their own land. All they have to do is build a fence around the land that they're staking for themselves, basically. And so he says that the two of them go out and they decide to make a fence. And they're going to make a really big fence because, they want a big piece of land. until they realized how hard it is to cut down those trees and to fell them and have it create a fence. So they decide, well, instead of having a fence that meets completely, they'll have some gaps in between. And hopefully the land won't escape out those gaps between the fencing, the logs. And so they're like, all right, well, the other thing we need to do to really stake our claim on the land is we need to build a house on it. So they decide they're going to build a really nice house, a substantial log house to excite the envy of the others around. But then when they start like cutting down those logs and getting them into shape and getting them ready to build their house, that too is really hard. So what they end up with, they call it a brush house. I would call it more of a lean-to. And as I was saying yesterday, this way. As I was saying, I like to watch Naked and Afraid on Discovery Channel. It kind of looks like this isn't even one of the best shelters that I've seen compared to those. But these guys, they had a lot of tools and clothes, and this is what they made. So, so that's where the reading that we had yesterday ended, with them having created that home, and that they decide, as night was falling, they decided to beach their boat at their very own landing. So on their land that they're trying to stake a claim to hold on to. All right. Today, day 7, we're going to read 4 chapters, chapters 23 through 26. Let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 23 of Roughing It by Mark Twain. If there is any life that is happier than the life we led on our timber ranch for the next 2 or 3 weeks, it must be a sort of life which I have not read of in books or experienced in person. We did not see a human being but ourselves during the time, or hear any sounds but those that were made by the wind and the waves, the sighing of the pines, and now and then the far-off thunder of an avalanche. The forest about us was dense and cool. The sky above us was cloudless and brilliant with sunshine. The broad lake before us was glassy and clear, or rippled and breezy, or black and storm-tossed, according to nature's mood. And its circling border of mountain domes, clothed with forests, scarred with landslides, cloven by canyons and valleys, and helmeted with glittering snow, fitly framed and finished the noble picture. The view was always fascinating, bewitching, entrancing. The eye was never tired of gazing, night or day, in calm or storm. It suffered but one grief, and that was that it could not look always, but must close sometimes in sleep. We slept in the sand close to the water's edge, between 2 protecting boulders which took care of the stormy night winds for us. We never took any paregoric to make us sleep. At the first break of dawn, we were always up and running foot races to tone down excess of physical vigor and exuberance of spirits. That is, Johnny was, but I held his hat. While smoking the pipe of peace after breakfast, we watched the sentinel peaks put on the glory of the sun and followed the conquering light as it swept down among the shadows and set the captive crags and forests free. We watched the tinted pictures grow and brighten upon the water till every little detail of forest, precipice, and pinnacle was wrought in and finished, and the miracle of the enchanter complete. Then to business. That is, drifting around in the boat. We were on the North Shore. There, the rocks on the bottom are sometimes gray, sometimes white. This gives the marvelous transparency of the water a fuller advantage than it has elsewhere on the lake. We usually pushed out 100 yards or so from shore, and then lay down in the thwarts in the sun and let the boat drift by the hour whither it would. We seldom talked. It interrupted the Sabbath stillness and marred the dreams the luxurious rest and indolence brought. The shore all along was indented with deep, curved bays and coves, bordered by narrow sand beaches, and where the sand ended, the steep mountain sides rose right up aloft into space, rose up like a vast wall a little out of the perpendicular and thickly wooded with tall pines. So singularly clear was the water that where it was only 20 or 30 feet deep, the bottom was so perfectly distinct that the boat seemed floating in the air. Yes, where it was even 80 feet deep. Every little pebble was distinct, every speckled trout, every hand's breadth of sand. Often, as we lay on our faces, a granite boulder, as large as a village church, would start out of the bottom apparently, and seem climbing up rapidly till the surface, till presently it threatened to touch our faces, and we could not resist the impulse to seize an oar and avert the danger. But the boat would float on, and the boulder descend again, and then we could see that when we had been exactly above it, It must have been 20 or 30 feet below the surface. Down through the transparency of these great depths, the water was not merely transparent, but dazzlingly, brilliantly so. All objects seen through it had a bright, strong vividness, not only of outline, but of every minute detail, which they would not have had when seen simply through the same depth of atmosphere. So empty and airy did all spaces seem below us, and so strong was the sense of floating high aloft in mid-nothingness, that we called these boat excursions balloon voyages. We fished a good deal, but we did not average 1 fish a week. We could see trout by the thousand winging about in the emptiness under us, or sleeping in shoals on the bottom, but they would not bite. They could see the line too plainly, perhaps. We frequently selected the trout we wanted and rested the bait patiently and persistently on the end of his nose at a depth of 80 feet, but he would only shake it off with an annoyed manner and shift his position. We bathed occasionally, but the water was rather chilly for all it looked so sunny. Sometimes we rowed out to the blue water, a mile or 2 from shore. It was as dead blue as indigo there, because of the immense depth. By official measurement, the lake in its center is 1,525 feet deep. Sometimes, on lazy afternoons, we lolled on the sand in camp and smoked pipes and read some old, well-worn novels. At night, by the campfire, we played euchre and 7-Up to strengthen the mind, and played them with cards so greasy and defaced that only a whole summer's acquaintance with them could enable the student to tell the ace of clubs from the jack of diamonds. We never slept in our house. It never recurred to us, for one thing, and besides, it was built to hold the ground, and that was enough. We did not wish to strain it. By and by, our provisions began to run short, and we went back to the old camp and laid in a new supply. We were gone all day and reached home again about nightfall, pretty tired and hungry. While Johnny was carrying the main bulk of the provisions up to our house for future use, I took the loaf of bread, some slices of bacon, and the coffee pot ashore, set them down by a tree, lit a fire, and went back to the boat to get the frying pan. While I was at this, I heard a shout from Johnny, and looking up, I saw that my fire was galloping all over the premises. Johnny was on the other side of it. He had to run through the flames to get to the lake shore, and then we stood helpless and watched the devastation. The ground was deeply carpeted with dry pine needles, and the fire touched them off as if they were gunpowder. It was wonderful to see with what fierce speed the tall sheet of flame traveled. My coffee pot was gone, and everything with it. In a minute and a half, the fire seized upon a dense growth of dry manzanita chaparral, 6 or 8 feet high, and then the roaring and popping and crackling was something terrific. We were driven to the boat by the intense heat, and there we remained, spellbound. Within half an hour, all before us was a tossing, blinding tempest of flames. It went surging up adjacent ridges, surmounted them, and disappeared in the canyons beyond, burst into view upon higher and farther ridges presently, shed a grander illumination abroad, and dove again, flamed out again, directly, higher and still higher up the mountainside, threw out skirmishing parties of fire here and there, and sent them trailing their crimson spirals away among remote ramparts and ridges and gorges, till as far as the eye could reach, the lofty mountain fronts were webbed as it were with a tangled network of red lava streams. Away across the water, the crags and domes were lit with a ruddy glare, and the firmament above was a reflected hell. Every feature of the spectacle was repeated in the glowing mirror of the lake. Both pictures were sublime, both were beautiful, but that in the lake had a bewildering richness about it that enchanted the eye and held it with a stronger fascination. We sat absorbed and motionless through 4 long hours. We never thought of supper and never felt fatigue. But at 11 o'clock, the conflagration had traveled beyond our range of vision, and then darkness stole down upon the landscape again. Hunger asserted itself now, but there was nothing to eat. The provisions were all cooked, no doubt, but we did not go to sea. We were homeless wanderers again, without any property. Our fence was gone, our house burned down, no insurance. Our pine forest was well scorched, the dead trees all burned up, and our broad acres of manzanita swept away. Our blankets were on our usual sand bed, however, and so we lay down and went to sleep. The next morning we started back to the old camp, but while out a long way from shore, so great a storm came up that we dared not try to land. So I bailed out the seas we shipped, and Johnny pulled heavily through the billows till we had reached a point 3 or 4 miles beyond the camp. The storm was increasing, and it became evident that it was better to take the hazard of beaching the boat than go down in 100 fathoms of water. So we ran in, with tall whitecaps following, and I sat down in the stern sheets and pointed her head on to the shore. The instant the bow struck, a wave came over the stern that washed crew and cargo ashore, and saved a deal of trouble. We shivered in the lee of a boulder all the rest of the day, and froze all the night through. In the morning the tempest had gone down, and we paddled down to the camp without any unnecessary delay. We were so starved that we ate up the rest of the brigade's provisions, and then sent out to Carson to tell them about it and ask their forgiveness. It was accorded upon payment of damages. We made many trips to the lake after that, and had many a hairbreadth escape and blood-curdling adventure, which will never be recorded in any history. Chapter 24. I resolved to have a horse to ride. I had never seen much wild, free, magnificent horsemanship outside of a circus as these picturesquely clad Mexicans, Californians, and Mexicanized Americans displayed in Carson streets every day. How they rode, leaning just gently forward out of the perpendicular, easy and nonchalant, with broad slouch hat brim blown square up in front and long riata hanging above the head. They swept through the town like the wind. The next minute they were only a sailing puff of dust on the far desert. If they trotted, they sat up gallantly and gracefully and seemed part of the horse. Did not go jiggering up and down after the silly Miss Nancy fashion of the riding schools. I had quickly learned to tell a horse from a cow, and was full of anxiety to learn more. I was resolved to buy a horse. While the thought was rankling in my mind, the auctioneer came scurrying through the plaza on a black beast that had as many humps and corners on him as a dromedary, and was necessarily uncomely. But he was going at 22, horse, saddle, and bridle at $22, gentlemen. And I could hardly resist. A man whom I did not know, he turned out to be the auctioneer's brother, noticed the wistful look in my eye and observed that was a very remarkable horse to be going at such a price, and added that the saddle alone was worth the money. It was a Spanish saddle with ponderous tapidados and furnished with the ungainly sole leather covering with the unspellable name. I said I had half a notion to bid. Then this keen-eyed person appeared to me to be taking my measure. But I dismissed the suspicion when he spoke, for his manner was full of guileless candor and truthfulness. Said he, "I know that horse, know him well. You are a stranger, I take it, and so you might think he was an American horse. Maybe, but I assure you he is not. He is nothing of the kind, but, excuse my speaking in a low voice, other people being near, he is, without the shadow of a doubt, a genuine Mexican plug." I did not know what a genuine Mexican plug was, but there was something about this man's way of saying it that made me swear inwardly that I would own a genuine Mexican plug or die. "Has he any other advantages?" I inquired, suppressing what eagerness I could. He hooked his forefinger in the pocket of my army shirt, led me to one side, and breathed in my ear impressively these words: "He can outbuck anything in America." Going at $24 and a half, 27! I shouted in a frenzy. "And sold," said the auctioneer, and passed over the genuine Mexican plug to me. I could scarcely contain my exultation. I paid the money and put the animal in a neighboring livery stable to dine and rest himself. In the afternoon, I brought the creature into the plaza, and certain citizens held him by the head, and others by the tail, while I mounted him. As soon as they let go, he placed all his feet in a bunch together, lowered his back, and then suddenly arched it upward and shot me straight into the air, a matter of 3 or 4 feet. I came as straight down again, lit in the saddle, went instantly up again, came down almost on the high pommel, shot up again, and came down on the horse's neck, all in the space of 3 or 4 seconds. Then he rose and stood almost straight up on his hind feet, and I, clasping his lean neck desperately, slid down into the saddle and held on. He came down and immediately hoisted his heels into the air, delivering a vicious kick at the sky, and stood on his 4 feet. And then down he came once more and began the original exercise of shooting me straight up again. The 3rd time I went up, I heard a stranger say, "Oh, don't he buck, though." While I was up, somebody struck the horse a sounding thwack with a leathern strap, and when I arrived again, the genuine Mexican Plug was not there. A Californian youth chased him up and caught him and asked if he might have a ride. I granted him that luxury. He mounted the genuine, got lifted into the air once, but sent his spurs home as he descended, and the horse darted away like a telegram. He soared over 3 fences like a bird and disappeared down the road toward the Washoe Valley. I sat down on a stone with a sigh, and by a natural impulse one of my hands sought my forehead and the other the base of my stomach. I believe I never appreciated till then the poverty of the human machinery, for I still needed a hand or two to place elsewhere. Pen cannot describe how I was jolted up. Imagination cannot conceive how disjointed I was, how internally, externally, and universally I was unsettled, mixed up, and ruptured. There was a sympathetic crowd around me, though. One elderly-looking comforter said, "Stranger, you've been taken in. Everybody in this camp knows that horse. Any child, any Injun could have told you that he'd buck. He is the very worst devil to buck on the continent of America. You hear me. I'm Curry. Old Curry. Old Abe Curry. And moreover, he is a Simon Pure, out-and-out, genuine, damned Mexican Plug, and an uncommon mean one at that. Why, you turnip, if you had laid low and kept dark, there's chances to buy an American horse for mighty little more than you paid for that bloody old foreign relic." I gave no sigh, but I made up my mind that if the auctioneer's brother's funeral took place while I was in the territory, I would postpone all other recreations and attend it. After a gallop of 16 miles, the Californian youth and the genuine Mexican Plug came tearing into town again, shedding fake foam flakes like the spume spray that drives before a typhoon, and with one final skip over a wheelbarrow and a Chinaman cast an anchor in front of the ranch. Such panting and blowing, such spreading and contracting of the red equine nostrils and glaring of the wild equine eye. But was the imperial beast subjugated? Indeed, he was not. His lordship, the Speaker of the House, thought he was, and mounted him to go down to the Capitol. But the first dash the creature made was over a pile of telegraph poles half as high as a church, and his time to the Capitol, 1 mile and 3/4, remains unbeaten to this day. But then he took an advantage. He left out the mile and only did the 3/4. That is to say, he made a straight cut across lots, preferring fences and ditches to a crooked road, and when the Speaker got to the Capitol, he said he had been in the air so much he felt as if he had made the trip on a comet. In the evening, the Speaker came home afoot for exercise and got the genuine towed back behind a quartz wagon. The next day, I loaned the animal to the clerk of the house to go down to the Dana silver mine, 6 miles, and he walked back for exercise and got the horse towed. Everybody I loaned him to always walked back. They never could get enough exercise any other way. Still, I continued to loan him to anybody who was willing to borrow him, my idea being to get him crippled and throw him on the borrower's hands, or killed and make the borrower pay for him. But somehow, nothing ever happened to him. He took chances that no other horse ever took and survived, but he always came out safe. It was his daily habit to try experiments that had always before been considered impossible, but he always got through. Sometimes he miscalculated a little and did not get his rider through intact, but he always got through himself. Of course, I had tried to sell him, but that was a stretch of simplicity which met with little sympathy. The auctioneer stormed up and down the streets on him for 4 days, dispersing the populace, interrupting business, and destroying children, and never got a bid, at least never any but the $18 one he hired, a notoriously substanceless bummer to make. The people only smiled pleasantly and restrained their desire to buy, if they had any. Then the auctioneer brought in his bill, and I withdrew the horse from the market. We tried to trade him off at private vendue next, offering him at a sacrifice for second-hand tombstones, old iron, temperance tracts, any kind of property. The holders were stiff, and we retired from the market again. I never tried to ride the horse anymore. Walking was good enough exercise for a man like me that had nothing the matter with him except ruptures, internal injuries, and such things. Finally, I tried to give him away, but it was a failure. Parties said earthquakes were handy enough on the Pacific coast. They did not wish to own one. As a last resort, I offered him to the governor for the use of the brigade. His face lit up eagerly at first, but toned down again, and he said the thing would be too palpable. Just then, the livery stable man brought in his bill for 6 weeks' keeping. Stall room for the horse, $15. Hay for the horse, $250. The genuine Mexican plug had eaten a ton of the article, and the man said he would have eaten 100 if he had let him. I will remark here in all seriousness that the regular price of hay during that year and a part of the next was really $250 a ton. During a part of the previous year, it had sold at $500 a ton in gold, and during the winter before that, there was such scarcity of the article that in several instances, small quantities had brought $800 a ton in coin. The consequence might be guessed without my telling it. People turned their stock loose to starve, and before the spring arrived, Carson and Eagle Valleys were almost literally carpeted with their carcasses. Any old settler there will verify these statements. I managed to pay the livery bill, and that same day, I gave the genuine Mexican plug to a passing Arkansas immigrant whom fortune delivered into my hand. If this ever meets his eye, he will doubtless remember that donation. Now, whoever has had the luck to ride a real Mexican plug will recognize the animal depicted in this chapter and hardly consider him exaggerated, but the uninitiated will feel justified in regarding his portrait as a fancy sketch, perhaps. And now chapter 25. Originally, Nevada was a part of Utah and was called Carson County, and a pretty large county it was, too. Certain of its valleys produced no end of hay, and this attracted small colonies of Mormon stock raiders and farmers to them. A few Orthodox Americans straggled in from California, but no love was lost between the two classes of colonists. There was little or no friendly intercourse. Each party stayed to itself. The Mormons were largely in the majority and had the additional advantage of being peculiarly under the protection of the Mormon government of the territory. Therefore, they could afford to be distant and even peremptory toward their neighbors. One of the traditions of Carson Valley illustrates the condition of things that prevailed at the time I speak of. The hired girl of one of the American families was Irish and a Catholic. Yet it was noted with surprise that she was the only person outside of the Mormon ring who could get favors from the Mormons. She asked kindnesses of them often and always got them. It was a mystery to everybody. But one day, as she was passing out at the door, a large bowie knife dropped from under her apron, and when her mistress asked for an explanation, she observed that she was going out to borrow a wash tub from the Mormons. In 1858, silver lodes were discovered in Carson County, and then the aspect of things changed. Californians began to flock in, and the American element was soon in the majority. Allegiance to Brigham Young and Utah was renounced, and a temporary territorial government for Washoe was instituted by the citizens. Governor Roop was the first and only chief magistrate of it. In due course of time, Congress passed a bill to organize Nevada Territory, and President Lincoln sent out Governor Nye to supplant Roop. At this time, the population of the territory was about 12 or 15,000 and rapidly increasing. Silver mines were being vigorously developed and silver mills erected. Business of all kinds was active and prosperous and growing more so day by day. The people were glad to have a legitimately constituted government, but did not particularly enjoy having strangers from distant states put in authority over them, a sentiment that was natural enough. They thought the officials should have been chosen from among themselves, from among prominent citizens who had earned a right to such promotion, and who would be in sympathy with the populace, and likewise thoroughly acquainted with the needs of the territory. They were right in viewing the matter thus, without doubt. The new officers were emigrants, and that was no title to anybody's affection or admiration either. The new government was received with considerable coolness. There was not only a foreign intruder, it was not only a foreign intruder, but a poor one. It was not even worth plucking, except by the smallest of small fry office seekers and such. Everybody knew that Congress had appropriated only $20,000 a year in greenbacks for its support, about money enough to run a quartz mill a month. And everybody knew also that the first year's money was still in Washington, and that the getting hold of it would be a tedious and difficult process. Carson City was too wary and too wise to open up a credit account with the imported bantling with anything like indecent haste. There is something solemnly funny about the struggles of a newborn territorial government to get a start in the world. Ours had a trying time of it. The Organic Act and the instructions from the State Department commanded that a legislature should be elected at such and such a time, and its sittings inaugurated at such and such a date. It was easy to get legislators, even at $3 a day, although board was $4.50, for distinction had its charm in Nevada as well as elsewhere, and there were plenty of patriotic souls out of employment. But to get a legislative hall for them to meet in was another matter altogether. Carson blandly declined to give a room rent-free or let one to the government on credit. But when Curry heard of the difficulty, he came forward, solitary and alone, and shouldered the ship of state over the bar and got her afloat again. I refer to Curry, old Abe Curry. But for him, the legislature would have been obliged to sit in the desert. He offered his large stone building just outside the capital limits, rent-free, and it was gladly accepted. Then he built a horse railroad from town to the capital and carried the legislators gratis. He also furnished pine benches and chairs for the legislature and covered the floors with clean sawdust by way of carpet and spittoon combined. But for Curry, the government would have died in its tender infancy. A canvas partition to separate the Senate from the House of Representatives was put up by the Secretary at a cost of $3.40, but the United States declined to pay for it. Upon being reminded that the instructions permitted the payment of a liberal rent for a legislative hall, and that money was saved to the country by Mr. Curry's generosity, the United States said that did not alter the matter, and that the $3.40 would be subtracted from the Secretary's $1,800 salary. And it was! The matter of printing was from the beginning an interesting feature of the new government's difficulties. The Secretary was sworn to obey his volume of written instructions, and these commanded him to do two certain things without fail, viz. 1. Get the House and Senate journals printed, and 2. For this work, pay $1.50 per thousand for composition, and $1.50 per token for press work, in greenbacks. It was easy to swear to do these things, but it was entirely impossible to do more than one of them. When greenbacks had gone down to 40 cents on the dollar, the prices regularly charged everybody by printing establishments were $1.50 per thousand and $1.50 per token in gold. The instructions commanded that the Secretary regard a paper dollar issued by the government as equal to any other dollar issued by the government. Hence, the printing of the journals was discontinued. Then the United States sternly rebuked the Secretary for disregarding the instructions and warned him to correct his ways. Wherefore he got some printing done, forwarded the bill to Washington with full exhibits of the high prices of things in the territory, and called attention to a printed market report wherein it would be observed that even hay was $250 a ton. The United States responded by subtracting the printing bill from the Secretary's suffering salary, and moreover remarked with dense gravity that he would find nothing in his instructions requiring him to purchase hay. Nothing in this world is palled in such impenetrable obscurity as a U.S. Treasury Comptroller's understanding. The very fires of the hereafter could get up nothing more than a fitful glimmer in it. In the days I speak of, he never could be made to comprehend why it was that $20,000 would not go as far in Nevada, where all commodities ranged at an enormous figure, as it would in the other territories, where exceeding cheapness was the rule. He was an officer who looked out for the little expenses all the time. The secretary of the territory kept his office in his bedroom, as I before remarked, and he charged the United States no rent, although his instructions provided for that item, and he could have justly taken advantage of it, a thing which I would have done with more than lightning promptness if I had been secretary myself. But the United States never applauded this devotion. Indeed, I think my country was ashamed to have so improvident a person in its employ. These instructions, we used to read a chapter from them every morning as intellectual gymnastics, and a couple of chapters in Sunday school every Sabbath, for they treated of all subjects under the sun, and had much valuable religious matter in them along with other statistics. Those instructions commanded that pen knives, envelopes, pens, and writing paper be furnished the members of the legislature. The knives cost $3 apiece. There was one too many, and the secretary gave it to the clerk of the House of Representatives. The United States said the clerk of the House was not a member of the legislature and took that $3 out of the secretary's salary, as usual. White men charged $3 or $4 a load for sawing up stove wood. The secretary was sagacious enough to know that the United States would never pay any such price as that, so he got an Indian to saw up a load of office wood at $1.50. He made out the usual voucher, but signed no name to it, simply appended a note explaining that an Indian had done the work, and had done it in a very capable and satisfactory way, but could not sign the voucher owing to lack of ability in the necessary direction. The secretary had to pay that $1.50. He thought the United States would admire both his economy and his honesty in getting the work done at half price and not putting a pretended Indian signature to the voucher, but the United States did not see it in that light. The United States was too much accustomed to employing $1.50 thieves in all manner of official capacities to regard his explanation of the voucher as having any foundation in fact. But the next time the Indian sawed wood for us, I taught him to make a cross at the bottom of the voucher. It looked like a cross that had been drunk a year, and then I witnessed it, and it went right through. And it went through all right. The United States never said a word. I was sorry I had not made the voucher for 1,000 loads of wood instead of one. The government of my country snubs honest simplicity, but fondles artistic villainy, and I think I might have developed into a very capable pickpocket if I had remained in the public service a year or two. That was a fine collection of sovereigns, that first Nevada legislature. They levied taxes to the amount of $30,000 or $40,000 and ordered expenditures to the extent of about $1 million. Yet they had their little periodical expositions of economy like all other bodies of the kind. A member proposed to save $3 a day to the nation by dispensing with the chaplain. And yet that short-sighted man needed the chaplain more than any other member, perhaps, for he generally sat with his feet on his desk, eating raw turnips during the morning prayer. The legislature sat 60 days and passed private toll road franchises all the time. When they adjourned, it was estimated that every citizen owed about 3 franchises, and it was believed that unless Congress gave the territory another degree of longitude, there would not be enough room to accommodate the toll roads. The ends of them were hanging over the boundary line everywhere like a fringe. The fact is, the freighting business had grown to such important proportions that there was nearly as much excitement over suddenly acquired toll road fortunes as over the wonderful silver mines. And that's a picture of the toll roads hanging out over the borders of the state. And finally, for today, we're going to conclude with chapter 26. By and by, I was smitten with the silver fever. Prospecting parties were leaving for the mountains every day and discovering and taking possession of rich silver-bearing lodes and ledges of quartz. Plainly, this was the road to fortune. The great Gould and Curry mine was held at $3,000 or $4,000 a foot when we arrived, but in 2 months it had sprung up to $800. The Ophir had been worth only a mere trifle a year gone by, and now it was selling at $4,000 a foot. Not a mine could be named that had not experienced an astonishing advance in value within a short time. Everybody was talking about these marvels. Go where you would, you heard nothing else from morning till far into the night. Tom So-and-so had sold out of the Amanda Smith for $40,000. Hadn't a cent when he took up the ledge 6 months ago. John Jones had sold half his interest in the Bald Eagle and Marianne for $65,000, gold coin and gone to the States for his family. The widow Brewster had struck it rich in the Golden Fleece and sold 10 feet for $18,000. Hadn't money enough to buy a crepe bonnet when Sing Sing Tommy killed her husband at Baldy Johnson's wake last spring. The Last Chance had found a clay casing and knew they were right on the ledge. Consequence, feet that went begging yesterday were worth a brick house apiece today, and seedy owners who could not get trusted for a drink at any bar in the country yesterday were roaring drunk on champagne today and had hosts of warm personal friends in a town where they had forgotten how to bow or shake hands from long-continued want to practice. Johnny Morgan, a common loafer, had gone to sleep in the gutter and waked up worth $100,000 in consequence of the decision in the Lady Franklin and Rough and Ready lawsuit. And so on. Day in and day out, the talk pelted our ears and the excitement waxed hotter and hotter around us. I would have been more or less than human if I had not gone mad like the rest. Cartloads of solid silver bricks, as large as pigs of lead, were arriving from the mills every day, and such sights as that gave substance to the wild talk about me. I succumbed and grew as frenzied as the craziest. Every few days, news would come of the discovery of a brand new mining region. Immediately, the papers would teem with accounts of its richness, and away the surplus population would scamper to take possession. By the time I was fairly inoculated with the disease, Esmeralda had just had a run, and Humboldt was beginning to shriek for attention. Humboldt! Humboldt was the new cry, and straightway Humboldt, the newest of the new, the richest of the rich, the most marvelous of the marvelous discoveries in Silverland, was occupying 2 columns of the public prints to Esmeralda's 1. I was just on the point of starting to Esmeralda, but turned with the tide and got ready for Humboldt. That the reader may see what moved me and what would as surely have moved him had he been there, I insert here one of the newspaper letters of the day. It and several other letters from the same calm hand were the main means of converting me. I shall not garble the extract, but put it in just as it appeared in the Daily Territorial Enterprise. But what about our mines? I shall be candid with you. I shall express an honest opinion based upon a thorough examination. Humboldt County is the richest mineral region upon God's footstool. Each mountain range is gorged with the precious ores. Humboldt is the true Golconda. The other day, an essay of mere croppings yielded exceeding $4,000 to the ton. A week or two ago, an essay of just such surface developments made returns to $7,000 to the ton. Our mountains are full of rambling prospectors. Each day and almost every hour reveals new and more startling evidences of the profuse and intensified wealth of our favored county. The metal is not silver alone. There are distinct ledges of auriferous ore. A late discovery plainly evinces cinnabar. The coarser metals are in gross abundance. Lately, evidences of bituminous coal have been detected. My theory has ever been that coal is a ligneous formation. I told Colonel Whitman in times past that the neighborhood of Dayton, Nevada, betrayed no present or previous manifestations of a ligneous foundation, and that hence I had no confidence in his lauded coal mines. I repeated the same doctrine to the exultant coal discoverers of Humboldt. I talked with my friend, Captain Birch, on the subject. My Pyrrhonism vanished upon his statement that in the very region referred to he had seen petrified trees of the length of 200 feet. Then is the fact established that huge forests once cast their grim shadows over this remote section. I am firm in the coal faith. Have no fears of the mineral resources of Humboldt County. They are immense. Incalculable. Let me state 1 or 2 things which will help the reader to better comprehend certain items in the above. At this time, our near neighbor, Gold Hill, was the most successful silver mining locality in Nevada. It was from there that more than half the daily shipments of silver bricks came. Very rich and scarce, Gold Hill ore yielded from $100 to $400 to the ton. But the usual yield was only $20 to $40 per ton. That is to say, each 100 pounds of ore yielded from $1 to $2. But the reader will perceive by the above extract that in Humboldt, from 1/4 to nearly half the mass was silver. That is to say, every 100 pounds of ore had from $200 up to about $350 in it. Some days later, this same correspondent wrote, I have spoken of the vast and almost fabulous wealth of this region. It is incredible. The intestines of our mountains are gorged with precious ore to plethora. I have said that nature has so shaped our mountains as to furnish most excellent facilities for the workings of our mines. I have also told you that the country about here is pregnant with the finest mill sites in the world. But what is the mining history of Humboldt? The Sheba mine is in the hands of energetic San Francisco capitalists. It would seem that the ore is combined with metals that render it difficult of reduction with our imperfect mountain machinery. The proprietors have combined the capital and labor hinted at in my exordium. They are toiling and probing. Their tunnel has reached the length of 100 feet. From primal essays alone, coupled with the development of the mine and public confidence in the continuance of effort, the stock has reared itself to $800 market value. I do not know that 1 ton of the ore has been converted into current metal. I do know that there are many lodes in this section that surpass the Sheba in primal assay value. Listen a moment to the calculations of the Sheba operators. They purpose transporting the ore concentrated to Europe. The conveyance from Star City, its locality, to Virginia City will cost $70 per ton. From Virginia to San Francisco, $40 per ton. From thence to Liverpool, its destination, $10 per ton. Their idea is that its conglomerate metals will reimburse them their cost of original extraction, the price of transportation, and the expense of reduction, and that then a ton of the raw ore will net them $1,200. The estimate may be extravagant, cut it in twain, and the product is enormous, far transcending any previous developments of our racy territory. A very common calculation is that many of our mines will yield $500 to the ton. Such fecundity throws the Gould and Curry, the Ophir, and the Mexican of your neighborhood in the darkest shadow. I have given you the estimate of the value of a single developed mine. Its richness is indexed by its market valuation. The people of Humboldt County are feet crazy. As I write, our towns are near deserted. They look as languid as a consumptive girl. What has become of our sinewy and athletic fellow citizens? They are coursing through ravines and over mountaintops. Their tracks are visible in every direction. Occasionally, a horseman will dash among us. His steed betrays hard usage. He alights before his adobe dwelling, hastily exchanges courtesies with his townsmen, hurries to an assay office, and from thence to the district recorder's. In the morning, having renewed his provisional supplies, he is off again on his wild and unbeaten route. Why, the fellow numbers already his feet by the thousands. He is the horse leech. He has the craving stomach of the shark or anaconda. He would conquer metallic worlds. This was enough. The instant we had finished reading the above article, 4 of us decided to go to Humboldt. We commenced getting ready at once, and we also commenced upbraiding ourselves for not deciding sooner, for we were in terror lest all the rich mines would be found and secured before we got there, and we might have to put up with ledges that would not yield more than $200 or $300 a ton, maybe. An hour before, I would have felt opulent if I had owned 10 feet in a Gold Hill mine whose ore produced $25 to the ton. Now I was already annoyed at the prospect of having to put up with mines, the poorest of which would be a marvel in Gold Hill. Well, that concludes this week's reading. We'll see next week what happens. Does Mark Twain manage to get a gold or a silver mine? Does he get some land? And if so, is he able to extract the ore and make some money off it? We will see. Thank you for joining me this week for our reading of Roughing It by Mark Twain. I look forward to seeing you next week, and let's hope let's see. I think the usual phrase is that there's some gold in them thar hills. Let's hope that he finds some silver in them thar hills. All right. See you next week, friends. Bye.